The big C-body fuselage-era cars debuted for 1969 over at the Chrysler Corporation, and they are some styling masterpieces. Today, however, we're going to talk about the 1971 Plymouth Sport Fury that you see here. Now, the fuselage-era cars would run from 1969 through 1973, and pretty much all of them were good-looking, except maybe the 1973 model years, at which point Chrysler had to integrate the new 5-mile-an-hour bumpers up front and 2.5-mile-per-hour bumpers out in the back, and just didn't quite look the same. But for 1969, 70, 71, 72, they all look fantastic. The 1972 Plymouth Fury, as some know, is one of my favorite. The 71 is not bad either. So we're going to talk about this beautiful 71 Plymouth Sport Fury. Now, the Plymouth Fury lineup came in many different variants. There was the Fury 1, the Fury 2, the Fury 3, the Sport Fury GT. So this is one down from the sportiest model. That Sport Fury GT would come with a 440 engine under hood, a 323 rear end, heavy-duty suspension. So this was more of a, I'll call it somewhat sporty Fury, if you will. This particular one is equipped with a 360 cubic inch V8 under hood as well. Not the 440, but also one up from the standard 318 cubic inch V8. Now, one of the things that Chrysler designers were trying to do with these fuselage-era cars was often to make them look wider than they really were, and they were wide to begin with. But take a look at that loop-style bumper, the loop bumper being very popular during this time frame, particularly after Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed. Automakers were trying to integrate larger bumpers into the styling. Again, this is before bumpers actually had to be functional. This was more of the look, I will say, of the bumper being something that was more robust than it normally was. And so you saw loop bumpers on Chrysler products, General Motors products, Ford products. Chrysler and GM maybe had them most predominantly. And this one is rather handsome. And also notice the full wall-to-wall grille here and the Plymouth block lettering that's kind of taking up most of the hood as it's spelled across the hood. Again, all of that done to emphasize width. You could even say that those 8 rectangles within which there's kind of a theme within a theme, these vertical bars within the 8 rectangles are also accentuating the width. Notice that they're horizontally oriented, as is the Sport Fury tricolor badge there on the driver's side. Of course, you also have this long slot underneath the bumper to help promote air cooling, also helping with the illusion of width, and a very flat hood. You just have the fender peaks on either side and a crease running down the middle. That crease is rather muted, and the effect is that this hood looks extremely wide because there's not a lot of ins and outs to it. It's just almost one flat piece except for that crease that runs down the middle. And the other thing I'll point out up front is the obvious hidden headlamps that kind of contribute to that full-width grille. That came standard on the Sport Fury. It was not standard on the Fury 1, 2, and 3. You had exposed headlamps on those. The hidden headlight Furies are far cooler than the exposed headlamp Furies. You also got the standard belt molding that you see that's running along the side of the car that we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. An unfortunate addition as part of the Sport Fury package. I wish that they had not made that standard because the car, I think, looks far better without it. But I should call it body side molding, actually. Just a shame. Oh, those body side moldings. Oh, well. And this is where it's just a shame to have that body side molding. Imagine this car without that body side molding. You've got this beautiful crease that just tapers gradually. Look at how thick it is and how you can see the highlight, particularly ahead of the front wheel. And then as it goes rearward, that surface just minimizes as it goes rearward, and then the highlight disappears. How elegant is that? It's just a shame that it's kind of marred by that body side molding that isn't accentuating any surface in the sheet metal. It's just there for protective reasons. Okay, I guess I've said enough about body side moldings. At least there's no door edge guards on this car. But you do have the very, I would say, kind of plain body sides, but plain in a great way. These fuselage-era cars were just simple and elegant. And the other thing that you'll notice here is look at the cowl height and how tall it is. Chrysler vehicles of this era, in addition to being wide, were also relatively tall. You stand up to this car, and unlike a GM vehicle of the era that's relatively low, or the Ford vehicles that are relatively low, you have quite a bit of interior headroom, and it's disguised by the fact that the cowl is very high in this car. So you kind of sit in a pit a little bit, but it's still a good place, I would say, to drive, and you have good sight lines. So Chrysler engineers and designers were not just designing something that looked good, they also made a car that I think was quite functional. And you'll see as we go to the interior that the belt line on the car is pretty high relative to the H point, or the point at which you're seated in the seat. And again, that's to help give you the headroom with the lower roof line, I should say at least lower relative to the belt line. There's not all that much glass area in this car, but it's a better package certainly than Ford, certainly like a Mark IV Ford in particular, which is a disaster from a packaging standpoint. But this one looks good, and it's quite functional as well. And one other thing I'll point out in this kind of side view is that while this car looks very large, and it indeed is, it was relatively short. It rode atop 120-inch wheelbase, 215 inches in overall length. This is at the same time the Imperial, as an example, was riding atop 127-inch wheelbase and was over 230 inches in overall length. So the more expensive the Chrysler product that you got, often the larger wheelbase and the larger car you received. So here you are getting something that is big, but not as big as the cars from the other divisions. Now, as we transition to the rear, we see a couple novel elements for the 1971 Sport Fury. The main one being this urethane color-keyed protective strip in the bumper. That was initiated for 1971, and it came standard on the Sport Fury. You didn't get it if you got the Fury 1, 2, or 3. In the case of the Fury 1, 2, or 3, it was just the regular old chrome bumper without that urethane pad. So you got a little bit more safety to go along with your bumper, and it kind of mimicked the front theme. With that loop bumper up front, you kind of have a loop urethane pad. Of course, here it is color keyed, as I mentioned before. Now, notice that I was talking about the hood being flat. Take a look at this deck lid. There's not even a crease running down the middle. It is just perfectly flat. You have the tops of the quarters kind of peaking, having peaks there, but the deck lid itself is extremely flat. Again, allowing the overall car to appear very wide. And here again, you get the concave backlight. For whatever reason, Chevrolet had this on their Impala and Caprice during this time frame. Even Plymouth had it on the Valiants, and I'm just not certain why there was such a trend in the design community on the lower end cars to do something so expensive. It had to have been anathema to the finance people, because this type of a backlight definitely cost significant money and probably had high scrap rates, and yet it made its way onto the Fury. And in this photo, you can even see how concave that backlight really was. Very tricky to make that. And you can see also the vinyl roof, the so-called boar grain vinyl roof that was available in 5 colors, of which green was one of them. Of course, there was gold, white, black, blue, etc. But green certainly was befitting of this car. And I'm not sure why Chrysler decided to call it boar grain, but they did. Now, on the inside of your Sport Fury, you did get these standard high back seats with the fold-down center armrest. You also got door pull straps on the Sport Fury. Ooh, because you were not getting the Fury 1, 2, 3 anymore. And you got a carpeted door lower, door card lower, that you can see in the driver's side, on the driver's side door here. So you did get a number of things. Something that's not visible, but that you did get when you opted up to the Sport Fury, was extra sound deadening behind the rear seat. Now, these cars did come equipped with Chrysler's so-called torsion quiet ride. But for those who have driven these cars, you know that the moniker torsion quiet ride is really just a bunch of ballyhoo. This car is not quiet relative to the competition. This is a unibody car, and I think one of the Achilles heels for this vehicle and the C-body Chryslers, unless you got the Imperial, is that they're pretty noisy on the inside. Chrysler did mention in the brochure that the Plymouth had 10 rubber isolators to help isolate the body from the road. Well, 10 just wasn't enough. These cars do have quite a bit of road noise and need some more sound deadening. I think Chrysler was just trying to be a little bit cheap and thrifty with the sound deadening, and that's just exemplified by the fact, as I mentioned, that if you got the Sport Fury, you had to really opt up to the Sport Fury to get the extra insulation behind the rear seat. So that's one of the unfortunate parts about these cars, is just they're not as rewarding to drive, I think, as the GM and Ford cars that are much quieter than these Chryslers were. But at least you did get comfortable seating, and it is well styled. And you can see Chrysler's near ubiquitous 3-spoke steering wheel, that the center area, I can't call it a horn pad because it's not a horn pad. There's 3 buttons, one on each spoke at the outer edges of the spoke to activate the horn. But that was really what changed, along with the color and maybe the rim texture. But that wheel was used in Plymouth's, Dodge's, Chryslers, pretty much everything. I don't believe the Imperial used that. The Imperial had a 2-spoke wheel, so a little bit different and more upscale there. But otherwise, that was the wheel that you got in your Chrysler. And when it comes to the instrument panel, one of the things that the Plymouth had, for whatever reason, the square speedometer was a hallmark of Plymouth's, and so you have it here along with the square clock. Interestingly, the vents for the air conditioning, this is an air conditioning equipped car. Notice on the passenger side how low the vents are. They're not inset into the top pad. They're kind of on the lower portion of the IP. Not quite sure why they did that. Maybe because the designers felt that it was just not going to look right, and they wanted the clean look on the top pad, especially with that midsection that has the fake wood grain. I guess that meant that you were putting it on the lower section of the IP. And then, of course, you had a consequently smaller glove box because the glove box has to be sandwiched by all of those vents. Oh well, nothing is perfect. Now, under hood in the Plymouth for 1971, you have the new for 1971 in the Fury's 360 cubic inch V8 that ran on regular fuel, made around 255 gross horsepower. This was a new engine. You could get tons of engines in your Fury. The 318 was standard in the Sport Fury that made around 230 horsepower. The standard engine in the other Furies was the venerable 225 cubic inch slant 6-cylinder engine. Then above the 360, there were a pair of 383 cubic inch V8s. Then on top of that, there was the Chrysler 440 engine that was the ultimate top dog. So you could get everything from a slant 6 to a 440. And as I said, the 360 was all new for this particular model year. And this was really an engine that was designed to, interestingly, allow you to operate on regular fuel, but give you the torque that you wanted. So the other engines were really, at least the other larger V8 engines, like the 383 and the 440, were premium fuel V8s. The Slant 6, of course, was a regular fuel engine. The 318 was a regular fuel engine. But the 360 was there to be a regular fuel engine that gave you more torque and a little bit more off-the-line grunt, and that, as again, was optional in the Sport Furies. Not a very sporty engine for a Sport Fury. You would think that somebody would opt up to one of the 383s. They're going to pick something, but I guess this person who ordered this car was an economy-conscious Sport Fury buyer. And, of course, this one is a air conditioning equipped car. So you see the big Chrysler V-twin air temp 2-piston compressor up front there. No electronic ignition on this. You notice on the passenger side, on the firewall, there's no electronic ignition box. Still running points and condenser on these, and still running pretty crappy spark plugs from the factory. As you've probably heard from my other videos, I highly recommend putting in AC Delco regular plugs in your Chrysler product from this era. I guarantee you it will run better and it will start better. Some people will say, like, oh, it should use that. You can't put Delco plugs in a Chrysler. That's just sacrilege. Well, it is, but I'm telling you, it'll run better. Just trust me. So do it if you need your car to run better. Instant starts when you do that. They run so much better. In any case, what do you think of this awesome 1971 Sport Fury? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.